My fiancée slept with my cousin before our wedding, so I called it off publicly and left them both in humiliation they didn't expect. I'm a 28-year-old guy who believed I was days away from marrying the woman who changed my life. And even now, saying that feels unreal, like I'm describing someone else's dream instead of my own reality. Lauren had been my fiancée for 4 years, and in that time I'd handed her every fragile piece of my future without hesitation, trusting her the way you trust the ground you walk on, never once imagining it could disappear beneath you. Our families were intertwined in a way that made everything feel permanent, especially my cousin Mark, who didn't just grow up with me, but practically lived in our house like a second brother, someone I defended blindly and loved without question. I remember laughing about how fate had wrapped all our lives together so neatly, and Lauren would squeeze my hand and whisper, "We're building something real, you and me." Her voice warm and steady like a promise carved in stone. Wedding planning was chaos wrapped in excitement. Floral samples scattered across the dining table, fabric swatches crumpled in corners, and lists taped to the fridge that seemed to multiply overnight. Every time Lauren's stress bubbled over, I'd pull her close and murmur, "Nothing's going to break us, okay? We're almost there." And she'd nod, resting her forehead against mine like she believed it too. People constantly called us the perfect couple, and hearing that made my chest swell with pride instead of doubt, as if perfection was something guaranteed just because enough people believed in it. Even Mark joked, "Man, you really hit the jackpot with her." And I'd grin like a fool, thinking, "Yeah, I did." Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the city hummed faintly beyond the curtains, I'd stare at her sleeping face and think about the life waiting on the other side of vows and celebrations, convinced I was finally stepping into forever. But sometimes, when I'd catch her staring at her phone just a second too long, or hear her tone shift when Mark's name came up, a strange chill would creep in, subtle and unwelcome, like a whisper I couldn't quite understand yet. This happened in the quiet days before the wedding, when everything should have felt calm, but instead a strange tension settled over our apartment like heavy, unspoken fog. Lauren started pulling away in tiny, almost invisible ways, the kind that make you question your own perception before you ever question the person you love, and I hated myself for even noticing. She used to leave her phone face down on the counter, but now it was glued to her palm, her fingers moving too quickly, her smile fading the second I stepped closer. When I asked, "Who are you texting?" she'd laugh too sharply and say, "Relax, it's just my cousin about the seating chart." But Mark wasn't her cousin, and that slip stuck in my mind like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Mark also started showing up more often, unannounced and overly familiar, lounging on our couch, helping himself to drinks, glancing at Lauren in a way I'd never seen before. Once, I heard her whisper, "You're not supposed to come here like this," and he smirked, muttering, "You worried he'll notice?" before they both fell silent when I entered the room. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that stress was twisting everything into something darker than it was, but doubt clung to me like damp air after rain. When I tried talking to Lauren that night, she sighed heavily and whispered, "You're imagining things, okay? You're just overwhelmed." Her tone soft but edged with something colder underneath. "I just feel like you're distant," I admitted, my voice low, vulnerable, almost pleading, but she rolled her eyes and turned away, replying, "Not everything is about you right now." And that hurt more than I expected. Still, I forced a smile the next day, endured floral consultations and guest list arguments, pretending everything was fine while my chest tightened with unease. In my head, I kept repeating that love meant trust, that 4 years of memories couldn't crumble over a feeling. But every time Mark's name lit up her screen again, a silent dread curled deeper inside me, whispering that something wasn't just wrong, it was waiting to be exposed. The night everything shifted felt ordinary at first, the kind of quiet evening where the air feels heavy, but you can't explain why, and that almost made what happened next feel even more unsettling. I was walking down the hallway when I heard Lauren's voice, low and trembling, drifting from the balcony, and there was a softness in it she hadn't used with me in weeks. "Mark, you shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, her words barely floating through the cracked door, and then I heard his voice, unmistakable, smooth, and too close for comfort. "You're the one who keeps calling me, Lauren. Tell me you don't feel it too." My breath caught painfully in my chest as I pushed the door open, the cool night air brushing against my skin like a warning I couldn't ignore. Lauren froze, her phone clutched in her hand, eyes wide with something that wasn't guilt yet, but panic, raw and unfiltered. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady but feeling it crack at the edges, like trust splintering quietly. She blinked, then forced a laugh that felt rehearsed. "No one, babe. I was just checking on Mark about the rehearsal schedule," she replied too quickly, her gaze sliding away from mine. I knew the sound of Mark's voice. I grew up with it echoing down hallways and across backyard bonfires, and that wasn't the voice of someone discussing table placements. My skin prickled as the silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "Why did he sound like he was comforting you?" I pressed, my stomach twisting into sharp, unfamiliar knots. Her expression hardened instantly. "You're being paranoid," she snapped, but the softness was gone, replaced by irritation so sharp it almost felt like blame. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back, my thoughts racing in circles, replaying their words on an endless loop. That night in bed, she turned her back to me, and the space between our bodies felt wider than the years we'd shared. As I stared up at the dark ceiling, listening to her shallow breathing beside me, a sickening realization crept in, quiet and relentless, and I knew deep down that whatever they were hiding, it was already happening behind my back. I never planned to go through Lauren's things, never imagined I'd become that guy, but the truth didn't reveal itself because I went looking for it. It found me when I was least prepared to survive it. That afternoon, her laptop chimed on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and instinctively, I glanced over, expecting some harmless reminder or wedding-related email. Instead, my heart slammed violently against my ribs when I saw Mark's name glowing on the screen, followed by a preview line that made my vision blur. My hands felt numb as I stepped closer, reading words that should never exist between my fiancée and my cousin. "I can't stop thinking about last time, the way you touched me." The room felt like it tilted, the air suddenly too thin, my breath shallow and uneven as I opened the thread, hoping I'd misunderstood, praying my mind was twisting reality. But there it was, weeks of messages, secret meetups, flirting layered with intimacy that tore through every memory I'd ever trusted. Lauren and Mark joked about almost getting caught, laughed about how clueless I was, and planned nights when I was conveniently working late or visiting my parents. My vision shook as I scrolled, my reflection in the black screen looking pale, hollow, like someone already grieving. My chest tightened so painfully I had to grip the counter for balance, the cold marble rough beneath my fingertips, grounding me in a moment that felt unreal. I could hear the shower running, the distant sound of her humming a song I used to love, and the contrast felt cruel beyond words. When she walked out wrapped in a towel, still smiling, still soft, I couldn't even speak at first, just held the laptop out toward her with shaking hands. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced with something sharp and defensive. "What is this, Lauren?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of every sentence I'd just read, every secret she thought I'd never see. She stared at the screen, then at me, silent and frozen, as if calculating her escape instead of feeling guilt. The air between us vibrated with betrayal so raw I felt sick, dizzy, like my body rejected the reality it had been forced into. And as she opened her mouth to finally speak, I realized the worst part wasn't what I'd read, it was what she was about to say next. I expected tears, shame, maybe even an apology that would shatter me cleanly, but what I saw instead was calculation, cold and precise, flickering behind Lauren's eyes as she crossed her arms like I was the one on trial. "You're really going to overreact like this?" she said flatly, her voice edged with annoyance rather than remorse, and that hurt more than the messages ever could. "What do you mean, overreact?" I whispered, the word barely leaving my throat as my hands trembled, every muscle tight with disbelief. "You slept with my cousin, Lauren. You mocked me." Her jaw clenched, and she shook her head as if I was being dramatic. "It didn't mean anything," she snapped. "It was just stress, fear, everything piling up before the wedding. You've been so focused on perfection that I needed someone to understand me." The way she said it made my stomach turn, like she was rewriting reality while standing in the ruins of our relationship. When Mark showed up after she texted him, I watched them stand side by side, united against me, and something deep inside me cracked beyond repair. Bro, you're blowing this out of proportion, Mark added, running a hand through his hair like this was some minor inconvenience instead of heartbreak. It was a mistake. You don't just throw everything away over one bad decision. One bad decision. As if weeks of betrayal and laughter at my expense were a single slip of judgment. The casual cruelty of it all sank in slowly, poison dripping through every memory I'd clung to. I trusted you. I murmured, my voice hollow, exhausted, stripped of the strength it once carried. Lauren scoffed softly. And I trusted you to not turn into this person, she replied, as if my pain was the real problem. They stood there, confident, dismissive, their words layering shame over the raw wound I'd already taken, and suddenly I realized how easily they'd flipped the narrative, how quickly my heartbreak became my fault. As they exchanged a look I couldn't decode, something darker settled in my chest, a quiet, simmering understanding that if they were this bold now, then the truth I'd yet to uncover was probably far worse than I ever imagined. I always thought discovering the affair was the worst thing I could experience. But that illusion collapsed the moment Lauren let her guard slip and revealed a truth that felt even more poisonous than cheating itself. We were still standing in the living room, air thick with tension, when she exhaled sharply and muttered, "It didn't just start now, okay?" My heart lurched. "What do you mean, not now?" I asked, my voice raw, trembling like every word physically hurt to form. She hesitated, glancing at Mark, and something about that brief exchange told me everything before she even spoke. "It started before the engagement," she finally admitted, her eyes refusing to meet mine. "Back when you were planning the proposal, we already crossed lines." The room spun violently, the floor suddenly feeling unstable beneath my feet, as if gravity itself had turned against me. I remembered the night I bent down on one knee, heart racing, hands sweating as she cried and said yes, while somewhere in the background my cousin and my future wife carried a secret so ugly it now clawed its way into every memory I cherished. "You knew I was about to propose," I whispered, the realization slicing through me with surgical precision. Mark avoided my gaze entirely, staring at the floor like a coward trying to disappear. Lauren sighed, frustrated, as if my shock inconvenienced her. "I didn't plan it to turn into anything serious," she said coldly. "You're acting like you're the only one who had emotions in this." That sentence echoed inside me like a cruel joke. I looked around at the apartment we decorated together, the framed photos of smiles that now felt staged, the faint scent of her shampoo lingering in the stale air, and everything felt contaminated, like rot hidden beneath polished surfaces. They'd been laughing, touching, betraying me while I saved for rings, planned futures, defended them both fiercely to anyone who ever doubted their loyalty. And somehow, sitting there listening to them justify it all, I realized I'd been an outsider in my own relationship for far longer than I ever imagined. As Lauren turned away and Mark quietly followed her toward the hallway, their whispered voices overlapping again, a chilling thought clenched around my chest. If this betrayal went back that far, what else had they hidden that I was still too naive to see? I don't remember when the room went quiet, only that at some point their voices faded and I was left alone with the wreckage of everything I used to believe in. I sank onto the edge of the couch, still staring at the same photos on the wall, the same throw pillows she picked out, the same life that had just collapsed in on itself, and I couldn't move. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my heart and left behind nothing but air and echo. I didn't scream or throw anything or confront them again. I just sat there, staring at the floor, whispering to myself, "This isn't real. This can't be real," like broken glass rattling in my throat. My phone buzzed with messages from wedding vendors and relatives, asking about final confirmations, and the sick irony of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Hours blurred together. I didn't eat. I didn't respond to anyone. I just lay on the cold bathroom tiles later that night, my back pressed against the cabinet, breathing in the sharp chemical scent of cleaner mixed with the faint trace of her perfume that haunted the air. I remember gripping my knees and thinking, "You weren't enough. You were never enough," and the shame hit harder than the betrayal itself. My reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, eyes dull, face pale, lips pressed together, as if even speaking felt pointless now. How did you not see it? I whispered to the glass, voice cracking. How did you let them do this to you? The worst part wasn't even their affair. It was the way they stood together against me, confident and careless, like my pain was an inconvenience instead of devastation. I felt small, disposable, replaceable, reduced to a joke they probably laughed about behind closed doors. Late into the night, the apartment dark except for the faint glow of streetlights leaking through the curtains, I curled up on our bed alone, clutching one of her pillows like muscle memory refused to release her, even when my mind knew she didn't deserve a shred of it. And as exhaustion slowly dragged me under, one terrifying thought lingered, heavy and unrelenting. If they could betray me this deeply and still sleep peacefully, what was I supposed to do now with a life that suddenly felt meaningless? I don't know when the numbness shifted into something else, but somewhere between sleepless nights and hollow silence, a strange clarity crept in, slow and unforgiving. I woke up one morning to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the pale morning light filtering through the blinds, and instead of collapsing again, I just stared at the ceiling and thought, they don't get to destroy me and walk away untouched. Lauren acted as if nothing had changed, drifting in and out of the apartment like her betrayal had been a minor inconvenience, humming under her breath while pouring coffee, avoiding my eyes as if that would erase what she'd done. We should talk, maybe repair things, she murmured once, her voice almost gentle, and I forced a thin smile that made her relax. Yeah, I replied calmly. We'll figure it out. The words tasted like metal in my mouth, but I let her believe them. Let her think I was the broken man too weak to stand up for himself. Inside, though, something hardened, sharp and deliberate. I stopped confronting. I stopped crying in front of her. Instead, I watched, listened, memorized every careless move she and Mark made. I saw how comfortable they'd grown, how boldly they moved around each other now, her lingering touch on his arm, his voice low and familiar when he stepped past her in the hallway. The sound of their quiet laughter crawled under my skin, but I stayed silent, letting them sink deeper into their illusion. At night, I lay flat on my back, staring at shadows moving across the ceiling, rehearsing scenarios in my mind, not to fix us, but to reclaim the dignity they stripped away. The air felt colder, sharper, filled with a quiet tension that only I understood. When Lauren kissed my cheek lightly one evening and whispered, "I'm glad you're finally calming down," I felt the faintest flicker of satisfaction behind my ribs. She had no idea that every bit of my silence was intentional. And as I stood alone by the window, watching city lights flicker like distant promises, I realized the moment I truly stopped loving her had arrived, and whatever came next wouldn't be driven by heartbreak anymore, but by something far more calculated and far more dangerous. The rehearsal dinner arrived wrapped in warm lights and fake laughter, and as I stood in the back of the venue watching everyone mingle, I felt eerily calm, like the storm had already passed inside me and left behind something colder. Lauren moved gracefully through the room in a soft dress, smiling for relatives, laughing with friends, playing the role of devoted bride as if she hadn't shattered me days before. Mark hovered close, pretending to be nothing more than the supportive cousin, his shoulder brushing hers just a second too long. My palms were damp, heartbeat slow but deliberate, as I stepped toward the small podium near the center of the room, the clinking of glasses and hushed chatter fading the moment people noticed me. "Can I get everyone's attention for a minute?" I said, forcing my voice to stay steady as eyes turned toward me, curious and expectant. Lauren's smile faltered slightly. "What are you doing?" she whispered, stepping forward, but I raised a hand gently, the faintest signal that this wasn't a moment she controlled anymore. "I just want to say thank you," I began, my gaze sweeping across familiar faces, "for coming to celebrate a wedding that isn't going to happen." Murmurs rippled through the room, confusion blooming like ripples in still water. Lauren froze. "Stop," she hissed under her breath, panic slipping into her eyes for the first time. "I found out that my fiancé and my cousin have been sleeping together for months," I continued, my voice low but clear, "right under my nose, while we planned this perfect future." Gasps burst from tables. A glass clattered somewhere. Mark's cheeks drained of color as whispers crawled across the room. "That's not true," Lauren snapped suddenly, her voice shaking. He's twisting everything. I pulled out my phone and held it up slightly. You want me to read the messages? I said quietly, and the silence that followed felt razor-sharp, slicing through every lingering illusion. Lauren stared at me now, terrified and exposed, as relatives closed in around us, voices rising, questions flying, chaos building like a wave desperately searching for impact. And just as I opened my mouth to reveal the final proof, she lunged toward me, desperation raw in her scream. Lauren's hand almost reached my phone, her fingers shaking as she tried to snatch away the last piece of control she ever had. But I stepped back instinctively, holding the screen just out of reach like it carried my final breath. Don't, I warned softly, but the word carried a weight that silenced the entire room for a heartbeat. Her voice cracked suddenly, desperate now. Please, you're embarrassing us, she choked, as if my shattered trust was less important than her carefully curated image. Mark moved forward, his jaw tight, eyes burning with something between guilt and anger. This isn't the time or place for this, he snapped. We can handle this privately. Privately. The audacity of it made my stomach twist. Privately is where you both betrayed me. I replied coldly, and the sound of whispers grew louder, spreading like wildfire through every corner of the venue. Lauren's mother stared at her in disbelief. Is this true? She demanded, her voice trembling with shame and fury. Lauren looked away, lips parted, unable to form a single convincing lie. Mark's father stood up slowly, eyes dark, disappointment heavy in his posture as he muttered, "What have you done?" The room erupted into overlapping voices, some shocked, some furious, others mourning a wedding they'd once smiled about. And through it all, Lauren's eyes pleaded silently, as if love could still pull me back from the edge. "You're ruining everything," she whispered, tears finally forming, real now, but far too late. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing where my devotion once burned. "You ruined it," I said quietly, but the clarity in my voice hurt more than shouting ever could. Mark scoffed behind me under his breath. "You're enjoying this," he muttered, and I turned slowly, my expression unreadable. Maybe I was, in some distant way, savoring the justice of watching their lies collapse under real light. As people crowded closer, relatives pulling Lauren aside, heated arguments spilling into shouting matches, chaos swallowed the room whole. And through it all, I realized this humiliation was only the beginning of what they were about to lose, and a question burned in my chest. Would the truth finally free me, or destroy what little I had left? I didn't stay long enough to watch every last argument tear the room apart, but I felt every stare burn into my back as I stepped outside into the cold night air, the sudden silence feeling almost foreign after all that chaos. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and for a moment I just stood there, breathing slowly, trying to understand why my chest felt strangely lighter despite everything I'd just lost. Behind me, muffled voices spilled through the doors, Lauren's crying rising and falling, Mark's anger cutting through in sharp, defensive bursts, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I knew if I did, I might see the version of her I once loved, and that version no longer deserved access to my grief. My phone buzzed nonstop in my pocket, messages flooding in from relatives, friends, people who once toasted our future, now asking questions, expressing shock, choosing sides. I didn't open any of them. I just walked, each step echoing softly against the pavement, my reflection distorted in the darkened windows of closed shops. I replayed every moment in my head. The first time she said, "I love you." The way Mark used to laugh with me over childhood memories. The promises whispered in quiet bedrooms, and it felt like mourning two ghosts who were still very much alive. "You okay?" my best friend murmured when he finally reached me, his voice cautious, unsure of how deep my wound went. I nodded, even though it wasn't true. "I don't know what I feel anymore," I admitted quietly, and for the first time, the honesty didn't feel weak. As I leaned against the cool brick wall, the night breeze brushing across my face, a slow realization settled in. Maybe humiliation wasn't the cruelest part of betrayal. Maybe it was the silence that followed, the empty space where love used to live. And as I stared at the dark sky, wondering what tomorrow would look like without the life I planned for so long, a haunting thought crept in. Would this pain fade into strength, or leave a scar so deep it reshaped the man I was becoming. The days after everything collapsed felt strangely quiet, like the world moved on while a part of me stayed frozen in the moment my life split in two. I packed my things in slow, careful motions, each item a memory I had to peel away from a version of myself that no longer existed. The apartment echoed with emptiness, the walls stripped of wedding plans, smiling photos, and promises that once felt unbreakable. Lauren tried calling. Mark left a voicemail filled with hollow apologies and excuses, his voice tight, with something that sounded like regret but felt more like fear. I deleted them all without reply, not because I was cruel, but because I finally understood that peace didn't require their explanations, only my distance. "You're handling this better than I thought," my sister murmured one afternoon as we sat on my bare living room floor, sunlight spilling softly across the dust particles in the air. I let out a tired breath. "I'm not handling it better," I replied. "I'm just choosing not to bleed for people who smiled while they hurt me." The words felt powerful, unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone stronger than the man who once begged for loyalty and honesty. Slowly, day by day, I reclaimed small pieces of myself. Morning runs, long showers, music that no longer reminded me of her. I stopped replaying every betrayal and started building silence into something safe instead of something cruel. One evening, as I stood on my balcony watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, a calm settled over me that I hadn't felt since before Lauren ever entered my life. It wasn't happiness yet, but it was something close to clarity, and that felt like a victory in itself. I realized then that their humiliation wasn't my triumph. My survival was. My strength. My ability to walk away with my dignity intact as they crumbled beneath the weight of their own choices. And as the cool night air brushed against my face and the city breathed quietly below, I understood something painful but freeing at the same time. Losing them wasn't my downfall. It was the moment my life finally became mine again.